Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. I'm Terry, your host, trying to get out of this Sheetz parking lot without getting hit. Oh geez, the soda's rolling around. Oh, that's not gonna work either. Oh, I know, I got an extra cup holder. So I just been out running. Saturday morning, actually it's a little bit after noon. I gotta get home because college football will be starting soon. There's a dude, no one's behind me, so I'm gonna watch this. There's a dude with a straight log truck, but he's got like 3 rear axles, and he's pulling into a parking lot of a bank like he's freaking lost. You see the weirdest things. Anyway, and by the way, I'm gonna do a video probably later today. There have been a couple more crazy ass accidents with trucks that had fatalities of people in cars, and it turns out the drivers were either not licensed at all in this country illegally. And by the way, I don't say people are here illegally if they're not. If they got a green card, it's not illegal. You might not like it, but it's not illegal. But and then so that was in Indiana, and then there was another one where a dude that came into this country and got a license in California. He's 21 years old, and he was under the influence of drugs and killed 3 people out in Fontana, Rancho Cucamonga, somewhere like that. On the 10, well, where the 10 and the 15 intersect out there. He plowed into a bunch of people without ever hitting the brakes and just stopped traffic. So I want to talk about that. But anyway, somebody asked me a while back, and I kind of been meaning to get to this. They said, hey, you know, how has trucking changed you? That was kind of one question. How has trucking changed you? And then the other question that people have asked is, you know, what do you wish you knew going into trucking? And so I'll answer the first question first. How has trucking changed me? And, you know, keep in mind I haven't driven in a few weeks. But one of the things that I was shocked to learn, and this will also be drug into what I wish I knew. One of the things that I was shocked to learn is how bad, and let me just preface this by saying, I think I knew that companies have historically, I mean, throughout history, you know, bosses have treated employees bad. Companies have treated employees bad. But at the same time, you know, I've known people over the years that love the company they worked with. You meet people that have been at the same place for years and years, and everybody stays or goes for their own reasons. But it really does, it really was a shock to me how badly trucking companies treated their drivers. Like, I always figured, hey, if you're running a trucking company, you know, you're going to treat the people that are making the money for you as good as you can. But I found in many instances, trucking companies doing, you know, the least possible for drivers. And even when good drivers are walking out the door, you know, sometimes people say, oh, well, if you vote with your feet, they'll get the message. But that's not true. People vote with their feet. I've seen good drivers leave bad companies, and those companies do absolutely nothing to change. Why? Because they believe that they'll just find somebody else that'll come in, and they don't care if the person that comes in doesn't do as good of a job. Because their assumption is, and I talked about this in another video when I was talking about what like dispatchers get paid, but their assumption is, you know, all drivers are bad. So when you go into a situation where you know, the culture is all drivers are bad, all drivers are lazy, all drivers do the least amount that they have to do, then even when somebody's good at the job and they're super reliable, super conscientious, they really don't get treated any better. And you know, the thing is, you could have a guy, I'll give you a perfect example. I don't know if I told this story in another video, but if I did, I'm still telling it again. So at the company that I left recently, Bowman, I was a trainer at my company, and my account, they only hire experienced drivers. But even if you're experienced, even if you've been driving a long time, you still have to go out with a trainer for at least a few days. Like the last guy I had on my truck, he was on the truck for 6 days. And that is because the account is a little bit unique. So there are some job specific things you want to go over. It's not just like driving doing a dry van thing, or reefer. And so anyway, there was a guy that had, I think more, he had been driving longer than I have, and he had been at the company longer than me, and he was an instructor. He did a lot of training. And so they decided that they were going to make him the instructor of the month, of the quarter, I don't know exactly what. They were going to put his name on a plaque. But in addition to that, there was this like cash award, and because I don't know what they actually call it, but I'll just call it cash award. And it wasn't a lot of money, but it was something. and the amount was $400. So he's told this by, and he's on my same account. He's told this by, I guess, the training department, or maybe our driver manager, but I think it would come from the training department. So anyway, we had the Netrodyne cameras in the trucks, the driver-facing cameras, and we would get safety scores every single day. And then the way you would get your safety bonus for the week is you had to have a score of 850 or better. You start out with like 1,000 points, and then it goes up and down based on your driving behaviors, etc. during the week. And you just had to have 850 for the week to get the safety bonus. If you didn't have 850 for a week, then you would start over the next week and you might get it. But there are certain things that happen that will drive your score down quite a bit. For instance, I think hard braking. But you can be in a situation where you have hard braking, mainly because you're like, oh, I need to stop in a hurry. Not because you were not anticipating anything. Well, I guess it is. But like, if you have a bunch of people cutting you off in the course of a week, and sometimes you have weeks like that, your score it would drive your score down. But because you're just slamming on the brakes to avoid collisions. And which, don't get me started on hard braking. I think hard braking is indicative of almost nothing. Because everybody's going to hard brake. And people that don't hard brake periodically are probably going to be in collisions more. But anyway, so apparently the safety lady, who doesn't know jack about trucking, she, like, at the end of this week, this given week, not this actual week, is like, oh, well, they're like, oh, so-and-so is going to be the driver of the quarter, whatever. And she's like, oh, well, his safety score was only 847 for last week, so he's not going to be able to be the driver of the quarter, month, whatever it was. And so after they had already told him that he was going to be the man, they're like, oh yeah, our bad, you can't do that because you're not eligible, because you had an 847 week. And I was like, first of all, they look like morons for telling him. But then they, you know, after they had already told the guy he was getting $400, they essentially renege on it. And so he quit. And my driver manager was like kind of shocked at that. And my driver manager was kind of new to trucking. So a lot of the times, he and I would talk quite a bit. I would just share with him things that he needed to understand about the industry, not necessarily the account, but the industry, how drivers think, etc. And he says, man, I can't believe a guy would quit a good job for $400. And I said, well, first of all, you're making an assumption that it's a good job. But I said, but here's the better question to ask yourself. Why would a company let a good driver? Because remember, you picked him as the instructor of the quarter, the trainer of the quarter, whatever it was. You're basically saying he's one of our top drivers, and you let him walk for $400. Like, that's chump change, right? Like, and so they let a guy who, by all accounts, was a great driver, and you know, that safety score doesn't mean jack. It doesn't mean a thing. All it means is that some computer algorithm said he wasn't doing a good enough job. But you know what? The computer doesn't drive the truck. And you know, and so that's kind of illustrative or illustrative, however you want to say that, of what this industry is like. And I really never imagined, right? I never really imagined that, because I was in the military, and then I practiced law before I came into trucking. But I never really imagined how arbitrary and capricious the trucking industry was. I never realized that there were companies that would lie about a driver's record. Like, I had a company that I quit because they treated me like crap. They didn't get me home when I was supposed to. They cheated me out of bonuses, and I wasn't the only one. I mean, they do it to all the drivers. I quit this company. It was J&R Shugo, and I got multiple repeated emails asking me to come back, including from the company president, although maybe he didn't really send it. Maybe it was just automated. But I got all these emails like, your job's still here, please come back, blah, blah, over and over again, right? Probably that went on for at least 4 to 6 weeks after I left. And I was already a GP Transco by this time. But then later on, they put on my DAC that I was not eligible for rehire. So they were like a jilted lover, you know? Like, they loved me until they realized I wasn't coming back, and then they hated me and tried to like screw over my career, you know? And those are things that I just never, you know, it kind of changed me. It kind of made my view of corporate America really kind of negative. Just as a matter of course. And, you know, I was thinking about this just recently because, and if you don't follow the WNBA, that's okay. But the WNBA has a lot of really talented women athletes. And some of them are more famous than others, but they're all really high-level athletes. And there was a statement from a player named Nafisa Collier, who plays for the Minnesota Lynx, and she's a great player. But she was talking about the WNBA commissioner basically acting like Caitlin Clark needs to like bow down at the altar of the WNBA because without the W, she would be nothing, which is totally false because Caitlin Clark was a huge, huge star in college and was already making 7 figures in college for endorsements and NIL and stuff. But anyway, you know, it's like there's a professional sports league where the lady that runs the league, who came from corporate America, thinks the players should be kissing everybody's ass just for having jobs. And, you know, it's entertainment, right? Like, no entertainer is guaranteed a job, but then none of us are. But it was just kind of interesting how public it was about the fact that they're more than willing to treat their employees like crap. The people that are making the money, the basketball players in the WNBA or the basketball players in the NBA, right? They're the least powerful people in the house, right? But they're the ones that generate all the revenue. Just like truck drivers, least powerful people, but where all the revenue is generated. And so that, you know, that was eye-opening. But let me just kind of segue into what, you know, what I would do differently. I think what I would do differently is this. When I came in, and so just a little background on my situation, right? So I came into trucking kind of almost accidentally, because what happened is in 2018, I had already closed my own firm in 2017 because we lost our biggest client and it just wasn't gonna work. And interestingly, I'm kind of glad I did, because I'm kind of glad I got out of practicing generally before COVID, because then COVID changed things a lot too, made the job a lot more difficult. But anyway, 2018, I'm working at a law firm, and I am one of the more senior attorneys. I'm not the guy that's been there practicing the longest, but I'm certainly not one of the newest attorneys. And so I had negotiated a deal with my employer when I got to the firm in the summer of 17. And I wasn't being paid a lot, you know. My base pay was like 80 grand a year. But anyway, and that was significantly less than I had made in, say, like the previous 4 or 5 years. So anyway, but I'm just, you know, I'm maintaining my lifestyle. I still had, you know, at the time, I still had 3 houses, including a house that was really was too big for the family that I had left living at home, because my kids started going off to college, doing other things. But I had like this 6,000 square foot house with, you know, 3-car on a corner lot, 3-car garage, swimming pool, you know. And I'm not exaggerating when I say it was the biggest house. And the only reason my house wasn't the biggest house in the neighborhood is because we had some neighbors that enclosed their pool. So that, I guess, counted towards their square footage. But in other words, I had a big wheel to turn, you know? So anyway, I lose my job in the summer of 18. I lose my job because, and I knew that my firm was planning on doing a merger. What I didn't realize is that these bean counters were going to be like, oh, well, you know, and they had called me into a meeting and stuff, and they're like, you know, basically it was you need to justify your existence meeting. And I was like, yeah, sure, you know. So, I handled all the cases that were like odd cases, because we did a lot of work for banks and stuff like that. So anyway, I was working there, and you know, I thought things would be okay, and you know, they weren't going to cut any positions because we were really busy. But but one day I came back from court. It was a Friday. I'd actually been in 2 different courts that day, and I I got an email from my boss, the guy that was basically selling his firm, and he said, "Hey, are you coming back from court?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm already back in the office." He's like, "Oh, I need to talk to you." So I go in and he's like, "Hey, I don't have good news." And I was like, "Okay." So I had already started the idea and started working on this idea of hauling stuff with my Sprinter. Excuse me. And so I was like, "Oh, well, I don't, I kind of felt like I didn't want to, just jump into finding another job in the law." And I got to admit that I'm not the best at finding jobs that I don't already know about. In other words, I've always had jobs after the Navy. A lot of the jobs I've had have been because I knew somebody. In other words, there was a personal relationship, and then somebody's like, "Well, hey, why don't you come work in this firm, or why don't you come work on this project," or something like that. So anyway, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just do something different. So I started hauling stuff in my van, and I've talked about that in the past. But anyway, at some point, my wife was like, "Hey, why don't you just get your CDL?" I was like, "Okay." But here's where I'm going with this. I was not in a good position financially to embark on a new career in trucking as I should have been. And that's because I had a lot of monthly outgo. And so what me going into trucking, and especially starting at night, where like for the first 30,000 miles, I was getting 30 cents a mile, 36 cents a mile. I still had a big wheel to turn, and I wasn't ready for that. So even before going into trucking, I wish that I had said, "Okay, this is what I want to do. Let me prepare better for the financial impact." Because I was kind of opposite a lot of people that come into trucking. Not everybody, but a lot of people, in that I took a pretty big cut in pay when I came into the transportation industry. Whereas a lot of people are, they're the second shift manager at Wendy's, and they're making, $28,000 a year. Well, they come into trucking and now they're making, $45 a year or more. So that's a big increase in wages. Whereas I come in, I'm making 45. That's significantly less than I was making. So we kind of weathered the storm, and my wife did a great job. But then we ended up, being able to get out of that house, sell that house, and just move back to Maryland, where we have 2 other houses. Well, anyway, that took a little while, and that made things hard. And honestly, if I had to do it over again and I was in the position I'm in right now, I would have just stayed at night transportation, because I liked my driver manager. I liked the situation. And then by this time I would have been able to train people. And I know guys that trained at night that, and I liked how night did the training. There were guys there that were making 6 figures, they weren't making a $150, but they were making 105, 108 grand a year, and they would train pretty often, and you would only have people on your truck for 28 days at a time, and then they'd move off, and that would have been a great situation. And I really did like the company. I liked that they had all these terminals and stuff like that. And so that was one thing. I was not in the best position to come into this industry. So I moved quickly several times. I was in my first year in trucking. Well, my first year in trucking, I was at 2 jobs. My second year in trucking, I was at 2 jobs, because I was just constantly looking for more money, and if it wasn't there, I didn't wait too long. So I wish I would have known, you know, what I was doing going in. It would have made things a lot easier. So that's the first lesson of, you know, what I wish I had known. So I'm at like 25 minutes. I don't like to make these videos too crazy long, but I'll revisit this. I'll revisit this topic, and, you know, I'll come back to this topic and talk about some more things I wish I had known. So thanks for watching, and watch for, like, I don't know, part 2, part 3, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.